Jerusalem sleeps under a sky of ash, but down here, among the twisted roots of the olive trees, the air is thick. It smells like damp earth and biological fear. Take a good look at it. It is not a marble statue. He is a man of flesh and blood bent over the rustic ground. His hands shake. His white linen tunic begins to be dyed with a dark, viscous trace that oozes directly from his pores. It's blood. Blood mixed with the cold sweat of someone who is looking in front of their own slaughterhouse. Dread runs through his veins. His nervous system is on edge. But there are no screams. Just a short breath that tears the night. He knows what's coming. Know the exact weight of the iron that is already advancing in the darkness. A crunch of boots breaks the fog. The steel of the torches already shines in the distance. The night of the cowards has just begun. Let's look at the profile of the subject. The documents of the time record him as a carpenter from Nazareth, a Galilean without noble titles or armor. But make no mistake, the man kneeling in the brush is not a helpless victim. It is the epicenter of a political and religious earthquake that is about to break the first century. For the Jerusalem authorities, he is the main suspect, a man who challenged the monopoly of the temple and the order of the empire with words that sounded like fire. In history, he is the most dangerous innocent who has ever walked the earth. But let's leave dogmas aside. Look at it through the lens of naked truth. This man represents the embodiment of your own vulnerability. It is the reflection of that night in which you were also betrayed. The mirror of that exact moment when you were left alone in the dark, knowing that the system was going to crush you and that no one would lift a finger to save you. The difference is that we run. We negotiate with fear, he with panic soaking his clothes and his body shivering under the fog, decides to stay. Don't look here for the pose of a soldier immune to pain. What you are about to witness is the anatomy of an unbreakable will, a man unlike any who has ever walked on this ground, who with the map of his own torture drawn in his mind, chooses not to take a single step back. Most know the clean version of this story. They have been sold the perfect oil painting, the predictable tragedy. But behind the liturgy hides a dark case of political corruption, collective cowardice, and a divine silence that chills the blood. In the next few lines, we are going to unearth what the filters of tradition have tried to soften. The real physical cost of standing when all your people turn their backs on you, and the look of a man who, with a single blink, disarmed the most violent empire in the world. Today you will discover that the true ordeal did not begin on the stake. It began in the mind of an innocent man who decided to endure the unspeakable for you. If you want to understand what really happened in that lawless dawn, if you are willing to look squarely at the rawness of a night where self-love was devoured by fear, stay in the shadows with us. Join us in this breakdown. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any postmortems of the scriptures, and let the rustic truth speak for itself. Let's turn on the flashlights. The first block is on the table. 3 in the morning on the outskirts of Jerusalem. The night thermometer has dropped to its lowest point. The fog creeps heavy through the Kidron Valley, a dry torrent bed that reeks of ash and the residue of the temple sacrifices. The air is dense. It can be cut with a knife, For most of the inhabitants of the walled city, this is just another spring night. They sleep under the comfort of their blankets. But for the file that we are opening on the table, this is hour zero, the exact moment when human loyalty dissolves like salt in water. Let's reconstruct the scene with the eyes of an invisible witness. Forget idyllic paintings. The leaves of the olive trees of Gethsemane are not green under this light. They are black shreds that cover the stars. The ground is hard, covered with dry branches and loose stones that hurt the knees. It smells like cold sweat. It smells like the old wood of the oil presses that give the place its name. And in the middle of that desert of shadows, silence is not peaceful. It is a silence that rings in the ears, a silence that weighs. The man is there. Only. The three who were supposed to guard his back have fallen under the weight of a sadness that they cannot process. You can hear their rhythmic, heavy breathing, the rustic snoring of the fishermen who promised eternal fidelity, but whose eyelids have given in to the fatigue of the flesh. These are the first signs of desertion. Meanwhile, a few meters away, the main suspect fights a battle that modern medicine barely manages. Dare to label. His hands seek the support of the earth. Fingers dig into the dust. Biological panic is real. There is no mystical anesthesia for the cellular tissue of a 33-year-old man who knows with absolute lucidity that the mechanism of his own destruction has already been set in motion. Every second that passes is one more step towards the slaughterhouse. He doesn't expect a last-minute miracle. He does not seek an escape route to the Judean hills, a territory he knows well, and where he could hide from the temple police for months. His mind, endowed with a vigor that defies the logic of survival, reviews the inventory of the pain that is coming. The rubbing of prickly pear leather on his shoulders, the taste of soldier's sputum on his face, the fracture of bones under the weight of rustic nails. He knows everything. It measures everything. And in the midst of that terrifying knowledge, human fear shows its crudest face. The chest rises and falls spasmodically. The tunic becomes damp. It's not water. It is the viscous trail of broken capillaries under the pressure of purely psychological agony. Research forces us to look at the details that the world prefers to ignore. At the bottom of the valley, crossing the stream, the first lights begin to blink. They are not stars. They are the resin torches of the guard. They move at the rhythm of a coordinated march. You can hear the dull vibration of the iron of the scabbards colliding against the pressed leather shells. The steel shines with a dirty orange tone, breaking the fog of the Kidron. At the front of the procession, guiding the executioners through the labyrinth of trees, walks one of their own. Someone who shared bread a few hours before. The trap is closed. The pieces of the political and religious board of Jerusalem have aligned perfectly to execute the cleanest crime of antiquity. The night of the cowards is about to break its silence. Let us remove the veil from events. Let's enter the garden. Let's get into the details of the registration. To understand the collapse of loyalty this morning, we must analyze the operation not as a mystical drama, but as a pinpoint police raid in the darkest corner of the periphery. The temple guard does not advance blindly. It is not a riot of angry men. It is an armed detachment, a shock force sent by the political elite of Jerusalem with a direct order: capture the suspect without raising the mass of the market. But the police have a logistical problem. Gethsemane is a labyrinth of old logs, deformed shadows, and rustic caves. In the middle of the night, under the dirty fog of the valley, all the men of Galilee dress the same. An identification error would give the target time to jump over the wall and get lost in the immensity of the Judean desert. This is where the human factor twists destiny. The investigation leads us to focus on the man at the head of the line, Judas Iscariot. Forget the caricatures of the repentant traitor. In this block of the file, he operates as the prosecution's key informant. Hours before, in the cenacle, the money had already changed hands. 30 pieces of silver, the legal price of a mutilated slave, weighed in his leather pouch. Judas knows the master's habits. He knows that after dinner, when the cold gets worse, the Galilean seeks the shelter of the olive trees so as not to sleep in the open. The pact with the priests includes a tactical code, a military indicator for the squad in the gloom of the orchard, a sign that leaves no room for error: a kiss. The most intimate gesture of Oriental brotherhood, transformed into the brand of the slaughterhouse. Let's now look at the other side of the scene. Jesus stands up. The rustic floor bears the trace of his physical agony, but the trembling of his hands has ceased. Here, the vigor of the different man is revealed. He was already operating with the full design of betrayal in his mind, while the 3 disciples stretch their muscles, confused. With their eyes swollen from sleep and the cold, Jesus watches the orange lights jump over the fence. There is no surprise in his features. There is not the panic of the citizen who discovers the police at his door. There is an icy resolution. He knows perfectly well who is leading the troop. He knows that the man he fed earlier that afternoon is the one now selling his location for the price of a piece of dirty land. The distance is reduced to 0. The squad breaks the tree line. The guards' faces are sweaty under their iron helmets. They are afraid of an ambush by the followers of the Galilean. Torches illuminate the small clearing. Judas steps forward. The air freezes. The informant does not hesitate. Walk directly toward the suspect, breaking the safe distance. Their clothes rub against the wet floor. He approaches the face of Jesus. A word breaks the stillness. "Hail, Master." It is the state of betrayal, the co-information of the contract. In that second, any man on earth would have reacted with his fist, with an insult, or with a plea for mercy. Human selfishness dictates defending oneself or spitting on the traitor. Jesus does something more disturbing. He is silent, keeps the body firm, the back straight. His response is a question in a low voice, direct to the informant's conscience. "Friend, why are you here?" There is no hate in his voice. There is the weight of a naked truth that makes Judas take a step back, his eyes fixed on the ground, feeling the cold of the silver burning his pockets. But the squad continues to point their spears. Confusion begins to grow among the disciples who wake up in the mud. Roman swords and temple clubs rise into the air. It's time for chaos. The guards hesitate. The bloodied and majestic figure of the accused does not fit the profile of the dangerous criminal that they had described to them. Jesus takes a step forward, placing himself between the iron guard and his friends, who tremble with fear. He takes control of the raid. He stares at the commanding officer and asks, "Who are you looking for?" The troops' response is mechanical, rehearsed to hide their nervousness. "To Jesus of Nazarene." What happens next defies the psychology of criminal behavior. Jesus does not hide behind his men. He is not looking for a human shield. With his face marked by hematidrosis under the dirty light of the fire axes, he answers with two words that cut through the dawn like lightning. "I am." The impact of his gaze and the vibration of his voice provoke an unprecedented physical reaction in the entourage. The historical record says that the troops retreated and fell to the ground. There was no physical blow, no swords of fire coming down from the sky. It was the pure vigor of a different man, the authority of an innocent who knows exactly who he is, that buckled the knees of the professional soldiers in the mud of the orchard. The executioners are on the ground, disarmed by the weight of a presence they cannot catalog. The order has been reversed. The prisoner is standing, sovereign. The authorities are on their knees, scared. Jesus asks again, with surgical patience, giving them time to regain their breath and their weapons. "Whom are you looking for?" They repeat, with their voices broken by confusion. "To Jesus of Nazarene." This is where the analyst of the facts must note the accused's strategy. He is not negotiating his freedom. He is negotiating that of the cowards around him. "I have told you that it is I. If you seek me, let these go." While his friends look for the darkest corner to disappear, he gives himself up like a lamb in the slaughterhouse, putting his body as a wall so that his people can run. The collapse of loyalty is total. The informant has done his part. The suspect is surrounded. The rustic rope ties are already coming out of the guards' bags. The iron approaches his wrists. The first link in the chain of injustice is about to close on the flesh of the Galilean. But at the edge of the orchard, among the shadows that the light of the torches cannot break, a sudden movement breaks the pact of silence. One of their own, desperate with panic, reaches for the steel. The night is about to take on a different color. The fuse of chaos has been lit at the edge of the shadows. The file records a paroxysm of blind violence just as the ropes brushed the Galilean's wrists. Simon Pedro, the man who hours before swore in the comfort of the cenacle that he would go to death for his master, collapses under the weight of panic. It is not an act of military strategy. It is the desperate slap of a cornered animal. He takes a short steel rope from his clothes and unleashes it in the darkness against the head of the first man in front of him. Malco, a servant of the official delegation, cannot avoid the blow in the middle of the fog. The metal misses the skull, but cleanly slices off the official's right ear. The blood gushes out, hot, mixing with the land of the Kidron. Any leader of a revolt would have taken advantage of the clamor of the attack to shout the order to retreat, to get lost in the thickets of the orchard while his men covered the rear. But let's look once again at the behavior of the main suspect. Instead of igniting rebellion, Jesus stops time. His rustic voice breaks up the tumult. "Return your sword to its place." There is no anger in his command. There is a higher sanity that disarms the logic of conflict. With the guards catching their breath and aiming their spears, He reaches out, touches the enemy's lacerated flesh, and stops the bleeding of whoever came to chain him. It is the last miracle of the flesh before the iron confines it to silence. But this act of sovereignty is the trigger for the true collapse. Seeing that the teacher gives himself voluntarily, what E is not going to invoke legions from heaven or lead a liberation guerrilla. The ground opens under the feet of his followers. The epic filter breaks into 1,000 pieces. The illusion of a kingdom of glory dissolves in the cold air of early morning. What the text records next is the autopsy of human faithfulness in 2 devastating lines. Then all the disciples left him and fled. Let's analyze the scene with the coldness of an investigator in the field. The desertion is absolute. Every man for himself in the middle of the fog. Rude men, fishermen with calloused hands who had shared the table, the intimacy and the secrets of the Galilean for 3 years, run barefoot among the stones to save their own skin. Fear is an acidic force that dissolves any oath. The biblical record even contains an anonymous police detail, almost obscene in its crudeness. A young man following the procession covered only with a fine linen sheet is caught by his clothes by one of the temple guards. The boy's panic is so brutal that he prefers to drop the cloth, detach himself from his only shelter in the middle of the cold night, and flee completely naked into the darkness of the hills rather than be associated with the prisoner. Jesus is left alone. The lamb has been isolated from the flock. The thick hemp ropes finally close over his wrists, tightened with the resentment of soldiers humiliated minutes before. They drag him up the hill, crossing the black torrent of the Kidron, back towards the walls of the city that hours before hailed him. But the trail of abandonment has a second season, one more painful than the escape in the garden. While the procession advances towards the palace of the religious elite, 2 of those men who fled decide to retrace their steps, staying at a safe distance, hidden in the smoke of the night. Peter walks through the shadows of the cobblestone streets of Jerusalem, following the trail of the torches. He is not moved by bravery. He is moved by guilt and the morbid curiosity to see how his master's light goes out. The investigation now takes us to the outer courtyard of the residence of the high priest. The night clock strikes 4 in the morning. The cold penetrates to the bones. In the middle of the courtyard, the servants and guards who have not entered the courtroom have lit a charcoal fire to combat the morning fog. Pedro slips between them. He sits by the fire, seeking the warmth of the embers, trying to blend in with the landscape of the enemies. He believes the changing light of the fire will hide his Galilean features, but fear has a smell that suspects cannot hide. A maid approaches the brazier. He holds an oil lamp high. The yellowish light falls on Pedro's tense face. His eyes reflect panic. "You were also with Jesus the Galilean," the woman says in the middle of the circle. The air is cut off. Pedro feels the cold of steel on his neck. Social pressure is an immediate court. His response is quick, dry, an automatic survival mechanism. "I don't know what you're saying." The first link of denial is closed. Pedro gets up, nervous, tries to change his position, and heads towards the patio door, seeking the air of the street. But the trail follows him. Another woman points him out to those who are there. This one was also with Jesus of Nazarene. The noose tightens. Peter no longer just lies. The record says that he denied with an oath, calling heaven as a witness to his cowardice. "I do not know the man." The master whom he called the Son of the living God has been reduced to the category of a dangerous unknown. An hour later, those sitting by the fire finally corner him. His northern accent, that rustic touch of the people of the Sea of Galilee, gives him away to the sophisticated inhabitants of the capital. Truly, you also are one of them, for even your speech makes you manifest. Then, the moral collapse reaches its darkest depth. Peter, the leader of the 12, begins to curse and swear with the rude idioms of the ports, spilling dirty words on the fire. "I don't know that man." At that same moment, the soldiers take Jesus out of one of the palace chambers to transport him to the main court. The accused passes through the courtyard, tied up, with his face covered in dust. The scriptures record an exchange of glances that freezes history. Jesus turns and looks at Peter. There is not a word of reproach on his lips. There is no cry of accusation. It is only the response in the look, clean, firm, loaded with a prior knowledge that crushes the heart of the deserter. Peter remembers the dinner prophecy. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." The rooster crows again in the distance. Pedro runs out into the darkness of the street, bursting into tears, gone, drowned by the weight of knowing himself to be a coward. The Lamb is completely alone. His friends have fled. His right hand has denied him 3 times to his face, and the doors of the shadow court are closing behind him. The investigation now enters the field of institutionalized illegality. 3:30 in the morning. The clock of human justice has completely stopped in Jerusalem. What the file records in this 3rd block is not a legal process. It is a bureaucratic lynching carried out in the heart of the night, an express expedient designed in the shadows to bury an innocent person before the sun wakes up the masses. The high priests, Annas and his son-in-law Caiaphas, operate as the heads of a clan that sees its financial and religious monopoly threatened. They know that they are breaking every law of Hebrew law. The law prohibited judging at night, prohibited judging on the eve of Passover, and prohibited issuing a death sentence on the day of the trial. But the city's elite don't care about the code. They care about the result. Let's enter the underground courtroom through the sensory details. The air reeks of tallow smoke, of expensive linen robes trailing on the dusty floor, and of the heavy breath of old men who have been awake for hours weaving a trap. In the middle of the semicircle of judges is the main suspect. The hemp ropes continue to squeeze his wrists, cutting off circulation. His tunic is dirty with the dust of the garden and stained by the sweat of blood dried by the cold of the early morning. Anyone in his position, exposed before the most powerful court in his nation, without lawyers, without witnesses in his favor, and knowing that the verdict has already been signed, would have given in to panic. I would have pleaded. I would have attempted a political defense, or I would have cried from helplessness. Let's observe the vigor of this different man. Remain standing. His gaze does not avoid that of the judges. His silence is a rock against which the waves of his enemies' despair crash. The court is in a hurry that borders on clumsiness. The record says that the Sanhedrin was looking for false testimonies against Jesus to hand him over to death, but they could not find them. The paid informants gesticulate in the center of the room, contradict each other, stutter under the flickering light of the torches. One lie doesn't fit the other. The political setup falls apart live before the eyes of the court. And in the midst of the prosecutor's ridicule, Jesus says nothing, doesn't interrupt. He doesn't defend himself. Its rustic and imposing silence is more destructive than any legal argument. He exposes the moral misery of his executioners without needing to utter a single word. Caiaphas, desperate due to the lack of evidence and unhinged by the prisoner's majestic passivity, decides to take the shortcut. He rises from his seat of honor, tearing the air with his garments, and stands before Jesus. He tries to force a confession under oath, the last letter from a judge without evidence. I adjure you by the living God to tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. The question is a death trap. If he says no, the Galilean movement dies in that room. If he says yes, the court has the technical word it needs to label him a blasphemer and demand his head. Here, the investigation reveals the protagonist's willpower. He doesn't dodge the bullet. He knows perfectly well that the answer he is going to give will seal the mechanism of his execution, that those words are the key that will open the patio of the scourge and the hill of the tree. And with his eyes fixed on the high priest, with a sovereignty that makes it seem that the carpenter is the one judging the court, he breaks the silence. You said it, and he adds, with a clean voice that echoes in the stone vault, that one day the tables will turn, and they will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power of God. The court's reaction is an outbreak of mass hysteria. Caiaphas puts his hands on his neck and tears his fine linen clothes, a ritual gesture to stage a horror that he does not feel, but rather celebrates. He has blasphemed. What more need do we have for witnesses? He roars towards the circle of elders. The judge's response is a unanimous chorus, a roar of men blinded by power. He is guilty of death. In that second, the nation's courtroom transforms into an animal pit. Let's remove the filter of pity. The semi-emptying of justice is consummated when the guards themselves and some members of the court approach the bound prisoner. They spit on his face, spilling dirty saliva over the remains of blood sweat. They cover his eyes with an old, dirty cloth and begin to hit him on the head with their fists and the palms of their hands, his ears ringing in the darkness of the bandage. "Prophesy to us, Christ. Who is the one who hit you?" They shout between laughter, oaths, and rancid mockery. Any man on earth would have been knocked out, cursed, or cried at the lowest physical humiliation. But the forensic analysis of the scene shows us a physical and moral resistance that escapes the human scale. Jesus endures each impact with a firm body. He receives the sputum and the fist in silence. His response continues to be in the vigor of his gaze every time the rag falls, a look that does not reflect hatred, but a deep pity for the men who believe they are extinguishing their lives, when in reality, they are only fulfilling the script that he already knew since the beginning of time. The domestic verdict is given, but religious leaders have a legal limit. The Roman Empire has taken away their right to execute anyone. They need Caesar's machine to do their dirty work. The morning begins to lighten with a cold grayish tone over the rooftops of Jerusalem. The Court of Shadows opens its doors to transport the wounded man to the marble palace of the Roman governor. The political power grab game is about to begin. The innocent is brought before the eyes of the bloodiest empire in history, where a man hardened by war will have to decide between the truth and his own survival. 6 in the morning. The sun in the province of Judea rises with a cold gray light that bounces off the monumental columns of the Antonia Fortress, the headquarters of the Roman Empire in Jerusalem. This morning's file now enters its most cynical phase. The temple leaders, those who have just spent the night spitting on and beating an innocent man in a basement, stop short at the entrance to the pagan palace. The historical record overflows with hypocrisy. They do not enter the governor's palace to avoid ritual contamination because they wanted to eat the Passover dinner. Handing a man over to the slaughterhouse did not break their rules. Step on the soil of a Roman, yes. It is on this stage of marble and pride that Poncio Pilatos makes his entrance. Imagine the profile of the governor, a soldier hardened on the borders of the empire, a pragmatic bureaucrat who despises Jewish customs and who has put down previous revolts with a tip of steel. Pilatos goes out to the balcony, his eyes half closed with sleep, annoyed at having to attend to a domestic case first thing in the morning. In front of him, the soldiers push the prisoner. Let's look at the contrast through the researcher's lens. Pilate is used to seeing criminals, fanatical zealots shouting war slogans, or murderers crawling, crying for their lives. But the man in front of him breaks all his schemes. Jesus is disfigured. His face bears the mark of the early morning punches. His lip is split. His tunic, moistened by blood sweat, has stuck to his skin with the dust of the road. And yet, his posture is straight. There is not an inch of submission in his shoulders. His presence has such an imposing vigor that the Roman, accustomed to everyone kneeling before the imperial eagle, feels an invisible chill. Pilate tries to get rid of the problem. He asks about the accusation, but the priests bring no evidence, only rhetoric. If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have handed him over to you. The cunning Roman detects the trace of political envy and decides to interrogate the suspect in private, inside the palace, far from the clamor of the street. The bronze doors close. Pilate sits in his judge's chair, observes the wounded Galilean, and tries to gauge his danger. Are you the king of the Jews? Here, the forensic analysis of the dialogue shows us the absolute sovereignty of Jesus. An ordinary man, finding himself alone with the only one who has the legal power to free him from the cross, would have used every second to plead. Jesus, on the other hand, takes the reins of the interrogation. He responds with another question that disarms the governor. Are you saying this for yourself, or have others told you this about me? It is not the response of a prisoner. It is that of someone who is scanning the conscience of his judge. Pilate, offended in his Roman pride, replies with contempt, "Am I a Jew? Your nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus does not defend himself against false charges, doesn't mention corrupt witnesses. He limits himself to declaring a truth that the Roman cannot process with his war maps. My kingdom is not of this world. And when Pilate, fascinated and frightened at the same time by the calmness of the prisoner, says to him, "Then are you king?" Jesus responds with the firmness of someone who has come to fulfill an eternal schedule. For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Pilate, the man of the empire where truth is bought and sold with legions, lets out a cynical laugh before stepping out onto the balcony. What is truth? The Roman goes out to the outer court with a conviction he said in his mind, "I don't find any crime in him." But the governor is a political coward. He fears that a tumult will provoke a direct complaint to Caesar in Rome, which would mean the end of his career. This is where he decides to activate an escape mechanism. Taking advantage of the Easter custom, he gives the people the option of freeing a prisoner. Pilate puts on the balcony the most extreme choice that his mind can devise, believing that the people will choose logic. On one side, Jesus, the peaceful teacher, the silent wounded man who has healed his sick. On the other side, Barabbas, a convicted murderer, a Coloreño Sujo terrorist who has spilled blood in the streets of the city. The contrast is brutal. Justice against barbarism. Pilate shouts to the crowd, "Who do you want me to release to you? Barabbas or Jesus, called the Christ?" The Roman awaits the name of the Galilean, but the response that comes from the square is a punch in the stomach of human justice. The voices manipulated by the priests break the morning air like an infernal chorus. Not this one, but Barabbas. Pilate, pale, looks at the innocent and then at the crowd. The power grab game has failed. The system has decided to release the wolf and sacrifice the lamb. The Roman knows that the truth is not going to save his job. Then, in a last desperate attempt to quench the crowd's bloodlust and prevent execution, Pilate gives the order that will open the floodgates of physical carnage. The governor washes his hands in a bronze basin, the sound of water falling on the metal, a futile attempt to cleanse the responsibility of a coward, and delivers the different man to the executioners of the Praetorium. The political intermission is over. Jesus is pushed into the corridor of flesh, where the most efficient torture machinery in the ancient world awaits him with steel and leather at the ready. Your body's vigor is about to be tested to the limits of human anatomy. 7:30 in the morning, we enter the darkest block of this morning's autopsy, the Patio del Pretorio, the corridor of meat. To understand the vigor of this different man, the researcher must strip away all clean mythology. The Roman flagellum was not a discipline of wooden rods. He was a dismemberment machine in life. The whip, the flagrum, was composed of several strips of thick leather topped with lead balls and sharp pieces of sheep bones. Its technical objective was not to cause pain, but to tear off the skin in layers, destroy the muscle tissue and expose the prisoner's ribs until he was on the verge of hypovolemic shock. Most men lost consciousness within the first 10 blows. Many died attached to the column before seeing the light of the sun. Let's observe the scene without filters. Jesus is tied to a low stone column with his hands suspended above to keep his back tense. An entire garrison of almost 600 barbarian soldiers gathers in a circle to entertain themselves with the Galilean. The first lash falls. Lead crushes the fabric. The bones catch the flesh and tear it off when the blow is removed. The record is chilling for what it omits. There are no pleas for mercy. There are no cries for help towards heaven. There are no curses against the executioners drunk with cruelty. You can only hear the short, deep breathing, the air leaving his lungs like a hiss between clenched teeth, while his body resists the impact once, twice, 30 times while standing. A vigor that escapes the limits of common anatomy. At the end of the punishment, the soldiers untie the ropes. Jesus' body collapses in the pool of his own blood, but his will remains intact. He stands up on his own. The cruelty of the troops then seeks psychological humiliation. They throw a layer of cheap tow, of a dirty red tint, over the raw sores, simulating the mantle of an emperor. They take a bunch of long, rustic thorns from the desert, braid them, and stab them into their scalp with cane blows, causing blood to flow into their eyes. They put a cane in his right hand as a scepter and kneel before him, spitting in his face and hitting his head with the same cane. "Hail, King of the Jews!" His ears ring with laughter. When Pilate brings him out onto the balcony covered in that crust of blood and thorns, believing that the crowd would feel sorry for him, the Roman says with awe in his throat, "Behold the man." But the system has no mercy. The final roar cancels the debate. Crucify him. The road to Golgotha Hill, the place of the cave, is a procession of agony through the mud and market of Jerusalem. Jesus carries on his shoulders, destroyed by the whip, the crossbeam of the cross, the patibulum, a piece of rough and splintered wood that weighs more than 40 kilos. Every step is a rock and sandpaper on raw flesh. The physical body breaks under the weight. It falls on the stones of the street, but the vigor of its gaze remains clear when it rises. Arriving at the city center, the execution is carried out with military precision. Let's remove the romance. They lay him on the tree. The executioner looks for a pulse on the wrist, locates destos space between the carpal bones, and places the tip of a rustic iron nail as thick as a finger. The hammer comes down. The nail tears the median nerve, causing pain equivalent to a constant electric shock in both arms. They do the same with their feet, bending their knees so they can support themselves and raise their body to breathe. They lift the cross. The weight of the body moves the shoulders from their place. Jesus is suspended between two common criminals under a sky that begins to darken abnormally in the middle of noon. It is here, at the absolute limit of human resistance, where the different man signs his most visceral profile. In order to speak on the cross, the prisoner must lean on the nails of his feet, rubbing his torn back against the rough wood to fill his lungs with air. Every word costs indescribable pain. Anyone would use that last breath to curse the mocking masses below, or the soldiers who bet their tunic on dice. Jesus places his feet, raises his body with superhuman vigor, stares at the executioners whose hands are stained with his blood, and utters the phrase that doubles the history of the earth. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." The afternoon clock strikes 3. The forces of the flesh are exhausted. Jesus knows that the map has been fulfilled, that the file is closed, and that he has drunk the bucket of pain until the last drop of gall. He places his feet on the iron for the last time, looks at the horizon with his eyes fixed on eternity, and emits a cry of victory that does not seem like that of a dying man, but that of a king who claims his throne. It is finished. Bow your head and willingly surrender your spirit. The silence, that falls on Golgotha in the middle of the darkness is sepulchral. The Roman centurion, the one in charge of the execution, who has seen thousands of men die on the stake, drops his spear on the dirty ground, looks at the motionless body of the Galilean, and pronounces the final sentence of the case. Truly, this man was different. The Lamb has finished his day on the night of the cowards. Let's remove the instruments from the table. The case is closed on the hill, but the consequences for the investigator have only just begun. The lights of the Praetorium have gone out. The dust from Golgotha Hill begins to settle under the gray afternoon sky. The high priests have returned to the safety of their offices. Pilate has washed his hands and returned to his reports. And the disciples, those who promised eternal loyalty, remain hidden upstairs, with the doors locked out of fear. The case is closed in the official records of the province of Judea. But for us, those of us who have removed the filter of tradition to look at the flesh, the ropes, and the blood, the investigation does not end here. The anatomy of this morning forces us to look at the most uncomfortable mirror of our own existence. It is very easy to judge Peter's cowardice from the comfort of our century, or to point the finger of moral superiority at Judas's betrayal. But the rustic truth is that Gethsemane repeats itself every time the pressure hits. And here remains the question that no historian, no philosopher, and no cheap theology can answer for you. If you had been there in that lawless dawn, with the cold penetrating the bones and the steel of the torches shining among the olive trees, where would you have been? Running barefoot in the dark to save your skin? Warming your hands in the fire of enemies while denying what you believe? Or washing your hands in the sink of comfort? The strength of that different man was not in avoiding pain, but in staying alone in the middle of the coward's night, knowing exactly the price of his silence. He didn't back down. We almost always do it. If this reconstruction without filters has moved something within you, if you have managed to feel the weight of that night, I invite you to be part of our shadow community. Subscribe to the channel softly so you don't miss the next scripture files, and share this video with someone who needs to look at the naked truth away from the marble altars. To know that you stayed with us until the last breath on the hill, write a single word below in the comments. Vigor. That's all. Put vigor in the comments to seal your presence in this block. Let the silence of the night do the rest. Until the next case.